acquisition, underway data acquisition, and maintenance of instrumentation for that acquisition, and archiving data and accessing data from 3 really important programs, R2R, ADCP group, and the Multibeam group. And we all, most of us, looking at your faces here, remember the days when most of our data were just lost, right? The data came in, they could go on a board, you might see them on a screen, but then they're going to be gone. And I'm remembering in a disappointed way, all the data that we collected back when I was a grad student in the Bering Chuck GCs. I don't know where any of that data is. I asked someone once, I may be able to find it on one of the old computers up at Fairbanks. But so, having the data be available forever is an amazing thing. And, thank agencies for that. And thank the, the heroes that we'll be hearing today talk about these projects, because I'm seeing some names here that have been around a long time doing this. And, that's what it takes. It takes that kind of commitment and dedication. So, Doug, let's go ahead and get started with it.
Sounds good, Dennis. Thanks for the introduction. We're going to start out today with the rolling deck to the repository update. And thanks to Suzanne Carbot, who's going to present today.
Great. I think Alice is going to run the slides.
Yep, and my computer just froze over here, so just 1 second. Oh, come on, little one. I'm not sure. Hold on, maybe I can swap it. It's thinking hard. Let's try over here.
Okay.
I can, yep, well, I'm just about there.
All right. Because we could switch to my screen if that's used.
If you have, okay, I got it now. I'll make sure and reboot this. Okay, here we go.
Oh, something's
okay.
happening.
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome.
All right. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to the UNOLS office for this opportunity to give an update on Rolling Deck to Repository program. This is an update for the past year. Next slide. So Rolling Deck to Repository, we are providing data management services for the suite of underway environmental sensor data that are acquired on the fleet during each expedition. And we've been doing this for expeditions going back to 2009. We completed expeditions for 2020 this past spring, and this is a histogram showing the number of cruises managed through R2R with color-coded by the kind of cruise, with the science cruises in blue, the transits in pink. So here's of course, the impact of COVID on fleet operations last year. We managed roughly half the number of expeditions of prior years. However, the gray line here is showing the total volume of data submitted to R2R over the year. And we're seeing a steady increase in that with 20 terabytes roughly submitted last year, similar to the prior year, in spite of the difference in the number of expeditions. And this is reflecting primarily the increasing number of sonars and split beam water column data sets that are very large volume and are increasingly being acquired. Next slide. Another possible COVID impact, this one is a good one. We saw actually an improvement in the number of days between the end of a cruise and submission to R2R for 2020. This figure here is showing, in the black line is the average number of days between cruise end and data submission. And we're tracking about 8 months for most of the past decade, but in 2020, we saw an average period of roughly 6 months. So presumably reflecting our operators having a little more time in the office. Next slide. As I described last year, OPP is now providing funding for management of the Palmer and Gould, the USAP-supported ships, through R2R. And this funding includes for migration of older cruises, which had been the environmental data, a subset of it had been managed through the Marine Geoscience data system up until last year. So we've now completed the full file set breakout, registration, and publication of the underway data for expeditions of the last decade. We are running the Palmer and Gould cruise distributions through the full R2R workflow, which means we're pulling out approximately twice the number of device file sets as had been archived as part of the Marine Geoscience data system because of their more limited scope. And this processing of older cruises is going to continue in the coming year. Palmer began operations in '92 and Gould in '98. So we have 18 years of Palmer and 10 years of Gould to continue to migrate over. Next slide. Another new development over the year, we released a vessel operator dashboard, and the overall goal of this is to enable operators to quickly see the status of their data submissions within the R2R pipeline, and hopefully help them and us to identify gaps, like, for example, cruises that they thought they had submitted, but that we hadn't received. So, for example, this dashboard, it has lamps to allow quick evaluation of status. So, for example, the top one here is a cruise from 2020 with the red lamps indicating that we haven't received the chief scientist data release permissions yet, and the gray fields that aren't filled in with no lamps indicating that those R2R processes are not finished, and several of those depend on the data releases having been obtained. Next slide. Another project, we worked on a proof of concept project with the RDESC group at Oregon State University to develop near real-time QC of the navigation data using the R2R process. So this proof of concept was done with the idea that in the coming years, as the new regional class vessels come online, and as there's some amount of near real-time data coming into becoming available, that this can be extended to other sensor data. Next slide. The R2R group also has devoted a fair amount of focus into the area of developing best practice documentation with a focus on the underway devices pertaining to the water column. This is a collaboration with the RCRV team and the IOD Ocean Best Practices system. And we're focusing on best practices for technicians. There were 5 active working groups set up over the past year, and we're involved in several of them, including a EK80 fisheries sonar suite working group, general flow-through systems working group, and a CTD profiler systems working group. Next slide. Okay, and a very important focus over the past year was on R2R system security and sustainability. We put a lot of effort into developing a detailed cybersecurity plan for R2R. We made use of guidance and templates provided by the Trusted CI program. We developed a very detailed information asset inventory covering hardware, software, workflows, and responsible people. And just as an example of the utility of this, we lost our senior systems administrator for R2R over the year, and we were able to very quickly pass on information and transition to other people making use of all of the documentation that we had developed. We also have put a lot of effort into enhancing workflow documentation, and this is going to be continuing in the coming year. We've also, over the past year, been working on developing our next generation R2R hardware. So this is actually turning off old servers and jet stores, which is a hard thing to do, but consolidation and simplification. We also made a change in our offsite deep archiving. We had been using Amazon Web Services for this, but with costs seeming to always be increasing in a way that's not clearly proportional to the addition of additional volumes that we were storing in AWS, we've moved to make use of Florida State University's Research Computing Center. Florida FSU is a collaborator in R2R through the SAMOS program. And for the same funds, we're able to have our offsite deep archiving at FSU, but with a possibility for data egress without extra charge, which you don't get from Amazon. Next slide. Looking forward in the coming year, we're going to have a significant focus on improving cruise and data search functionality. We're going to be working with UNOLS office to harvest cruise metadata. We'd like to harvest it directly from the MFP once that's operational. We also have continuing efforts with the RDesk group to help improve methods for more automated extraction of device metadata and exploring how to do QC of these near real-time data streams. Finally, a plug, we are looking to hire someone to join the R2R leadership team at Lamont. And if anybody is interested, please feel free to contact me directly, or we have the applications can be submitted at these URLs. And last slide. Thanks as always to our funders, NSF ONR, Schmidt Ocean Exploration Trust for the work we do for their vessels, and as well as our collaborators. Very close collaboration with NOAA has been essential in all of this, as well as UNOLS. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. It was great. Summary update for what's happened in the last year. Can we, any questions for Suzanne from anybody?
This is Larry. Our question, maybe it's not for Suzanne, but maybe more for our NSF representatives. The problem that Suzanne pointed out with AWS is one that we certainly are facing too. Lack of transparency of charges. Easy to get data in, but then all of a sudden, surprise charges for this and that. And I'm wondering if this FSU type model is something that can be expanded to a broader part of the community.
Well, I'm an NSF type, but I don't really have an answer. I didn't really understand it was a problem until recently, but if there's a solution that you guys can think of, I think that we're behind it. Does anybody else here at NSF have any ideas?
So I would just add that there is an effort through EarthCube and the Council of Data Facilities to develop some possible shared resources for data storage and servers. I think that's a long-term thing. I don't know where that actually is, but there's been a fair amount of discussion about that.
John Orcutt has a question.
Actually, more of a statement. Data collected too on ocean bottom seismographs is being archived at IRIS, and it's about well more than a petabyte now. So it's a fairly large collection. But IRIS is changing. They're amalgamating with an organization in geodesy and earth sciences. It's important for the NSF anyway, and I suspect they've already thought that through, that we will want to continue to archive the ocean data from these seismographs in the same place. That's all.
Thanks, John. Any other comments or thoughts on those topics? Okay, great. Thanks again, Suzanne, for that. Really appreciate it. And the whole team and what you guys do very quietly behind the scenes, but very importantly.
Thanks.
Very essential. So, okay, we're going to move on to the Multibeam Advisory Committee update from Kevin Jerem from the
Got a
Coastal Center
comment
for Ocean Mapping at
before
UNH.
before you move on.
Sure, Jamie.
I was just saying that IODP is doing long-term. Wonder if that, which is associated with CERN, which is a no-cost long-term solution. So, that's ultimately where the drilling data is going to wind up. It was originally going to go to NGDC, and that is morphed in the, there's some uncertainty in the funding. So, but Zenova seems to be ZENOVO. You can Google it. It's associated with CERN, and that might be a possible approach.
Jamie, you broke up right at the very beginning of your comments. You kind of froze briefly.
Yeah, I was saying the Jordy's resolution IODP data and the deep sea drilling project in the long run in Zenova, this database that's associated with CERN.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to shift over now to the MAC update from Kevin Jerem from Coastal Center for Ocean Mapping at UNH. Kevin.
Great. Thank you, Doug. I'm going to try to share my screen here. Hopefully, come on. That should be full screen for you, hopefully.
We don't see anything.
Hmm.
Okay. We're having a-
How
there
about
we
that?
go. Yes, there we go. Yep.
Now it's
Okay.
starting to. There you go.
Excellent. Great. Okay, so thank you. I'll move quickly here. But yeah, my name is Kevin Jerem. I work for the Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping at the University of New Hampshire with Paul Johnson. We're both working with Larry. He'll talk later. And I work with Vicky Farini as well on the Multibeam Advisory Committee. So I'll give a quick update of what we've been up to in the last year. Of course, I want to acknowledge NSF for our funding. We've been around since 2011. So we're wrapping up our first 10 years. And I want to say a big thank you to Jim Hollick for supporting the MAC from the beginning and putting us into a 5-year grant cycle here. Alice said we should focus on changes and challenges for this update. And so the tools we use for this have been changing, but the goals are the same. So collect high quality multibeam data across the fleet. The MAC tries to provide support both onboard and remotely to the ships, standardize system performance testing, and publish those results publicly. So we can have open dialogue about how systems are doing and share best practices and share troubleshooting solutions and expected performance of these systems. So this is done on request from vessel operators. We do post reports from the fleet and related documentation from other platforms on the website. The website's been updated thanks to Vicky, and we have a email help desk where you can reach us if you have any mapping questions. Those emails go to all three of us, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. So in the fleet, quick overview, there are a dozen vessels with 15 Kongsberg multibeam systems, mostly geared toward deep water operations, depending on who you ask. Our CRVs are on the way, and so we'll be starting to plan those sea acceptance trials soon, actually. There are some shallow water systems in the fleet from Reason, but because of the majority Kongsberg systems, that's where the MAC tends to focus. The RCRVs will be the first Kongsberg shallow water systems, the EM2040s, in the fleet. With that focus on Kongsberg, here's a quick overview of those systems, where they are on different vessels, and a general idea of their life cycle stage, and when we last visited or supported that ship. Changes in 2021, the Atlantis got a EM124 complete new system with a CPATH. Sally Ride upgraded their EM122 to a 124 topside. So we were involved in both of those SATs. We have reached half the fleet just this season with quality assurance testing or sea acceptance testing. Many of those vessels we also worked with in 2020. We have a few that like to work with us every year, which is wonderful. So what that means is in the last 2 seasons, we've reached all but one vessel. The challenges around that, of course, related to travel restrictions, the pandemic. Our remote support approach has been put into use across the board for all sorts of interactions, all sorts of types of support. And it works, but it's never the same as being on board. So that's a challenge, an ongoing challenge. There are some growing pains with new software in the fleet, with some of the new systems, new hardware, and the software that runs that. There have been times we've been at sea and getting daily updates from Norway with new software. So that has been a challenge. Some of the older systems in the fleet, we need to start thinking about replacement. So that's something we can plan for, sort of end of life performance testing and planning for the next stage for those vessels. Whenever we provide this kind of support, we try to develop a checklist with test items in order of priority for their impact on subsequent testing, taking into account the ship schedule, the working areas, the other stuff happening on board, and then thinking about opportunities to collect data later if needed. In the last year, we've tried to improve this process, try to clarify some of those means of communicating with the ship if we can't be on board. We're trying to start earlier in each case. It's always been a collaborative process, but we're trying to get more folks on board. So involve the technicians at every stage. And this turns into a central resource for planning. Super useful because some of these checklists you can use as a template for the next time. And it makes that process easier. So here are some of the typical tests we try to cram into a short visit. We do try to condense the working area as much as possible. The benefit, of course, that becomes more important every year is as we have more and more proven sites, we can reuse them. It makes the planning easier. That's always a challenge because we have a limited window. We're trying to stay flexible. In this list of typical test activities, I've highlighted backscatter normalization as a change because there's increasing focus on quality backscatter products, and the backscatter normalization test is often put off to the end and often just not done at all. So I think as time goes on, we're going to see increasing emphasis on that. We're developing our own assessment tools that complement the commercial software packages out there. These are in continuous development. You can look at our reports for example plots, and feedback is always welcome. For scientists who are considering a certain ship or a certain system. You might want to look at the extinction plots for planning your surveys and expected coverage. You can even use these tools yourself. Go get some data and run them through the plotter, and we can help you do that. Since 2020, again, we've interacted with half the fleet. Ongoing challenges with travel and schedule overlap actually is one case, a couple cases where remote support has come in handy, not because we couldn't be on board, but because we had overlapping ship schedules. So we were able to stay in one place or break that up across members of the MAC. So big thank you to the folks on board these ships who've made this possible. We've added support for new formats and new processing features in the assessment tools. And we've been involved in a variety of non-MAC testing with autonomous platforms, new hardware, and these tests get folded back into the MAC approach. So we have new proven sites and get to shake things down on other platforms before we see it in the US fleet. So some lessons learned from this last year, again, increasing value of reusing proven test sites and established test methods. It makes the planning easier. It makes the results more meaningful because you can look at one ship year after year or across ships at the same site. We are seeing increasing emphasis and value on transit mapping. Larry will speak to this. Filling the gaps, of course, contributing to the global grids, but also catching problems early. The challenge for the MAC here is that our visits are typically pretty short and some performance issues become visible only in more routine use or different conditions. And I have some examples there, but I'll just keep moving for time. So next up, we're gonna try to help ships improve their transit mapping campaigns. The big picture again here is mapping the gaps, covering the US exclusive economic zone, contributing to the grids. Larry's going to talk about this in the context of the UN Ocean Decade. For the ship, this is a challenge, but it's also an important opportunity for performance testing. Some examples on the screen here of times where we uncovered inappropriate runtime parameters just based on transit data. So we want to help make sure that the techs on board have tools they need to run their systems during transits and collect good data. Try to make that as painless and as worthwhile as possible for them. Next up, we'll be working with the RCRVs and the Healy for some new systems. There are some other late life cycle platforms out there that need some performance testing and start thinking about planning for replacement. And we're starting to discuss some sort of community-based mapping resource, some wiki that can be quickly and easily updated by technicians and users from academia or industry, anybody. This winter we'll take part in a What Went Wrong Wednesday. And so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the UNOLS Tech Training Committee for that. And you can always reach us on the help desk as well. So check out the website, look at the reports. We're always open to feedback and reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks for that comprehensive update, Kevin. Any questions for him? Okay, well, thanks so much. We appreciate the work of your team. Again, it's a very important role that not everybody sees it, but it's critical to the success of the community.
Thanks for having us.
Sure enough, our pleasure. Okay, and next up is Jules Hummon's going to talk to us about the ADCP program. Welcome, Jules.
Hi. I'm happy to be here. I feel like I'm at a family reunion with my first cousins, R2R and the MEC, Multibeam Advisory Committee. And I'm always thrilled at this whole meeting because everybody's clearly so passionate about what they do. And yet we all depend on each other. Anyway. Okay, I guess, oops. Oh, well, I'll just proceed. There's a little pop-up thing there that I think isn't mine. No, that's Alice's. There we go. Okay. So University of Hawaii Data Acquisition System. This was mostly written by Eric Fearing and myself with work on the acquisition part starting about 20 years ago. It builds on an earlier core of ADCP processing, CODIS processing that was actually started in the late 80s. I'm going to try to not repeat very many slides from my RV Tech Talk, so most of this is new. UHDAS is currently installed on the academic research fleet, the NOAA fleet, and 6 other paying customers. COVID may have slowed things down in 2020, but 2021 has been very busy. We monitor approximately 40 ships and 78 RDI ADCPs. What does UHDAS do? Acquisition, we collect the ADCP data, but that also requires position, gyro, which is an accurate or a reliable heading device, accurate heading, which would come from a CPATH or a POSMV or other devices. Automated processing, that's that stuff that's the CODIS processing that started 30 years ago, which includes single ping editing, averaging, serving of near real-time ocean current data and figures on a ship-based website for the science users. If you click on the ATSI website link, you'll see an example of that. Monitoring, every day we get an email, an automated email from the UHDAS computer, which includes status about the various systems which we've added to the collection so far. And we look at that. We have a status page, a public facing status page, which will be on the next slide in just a sec. And stewardship. We really do want to raise the profile of ADCP data. We want to improve the quality of it and the algorithms, the visibility, the access. Next slide. So this is the public facing monitoring page. If you click on any of the things called FIGs, you will see a one-day figure of the ADCP data from that ship, from each of its instruments. If you click on DIR, you will see the gory details of all the little file snippets that we send back. And if you click on email, you'll see the status email that we read. Our monitoring has been greatly improved by the writing of a configured ticketing system for us so that we can keep track of our what's going on. UHDAS was formally installed on the Kilomoana in 2003 and a few other informal installations early on, Oceanus and the 2 polar ships. Sandy Shore asked us to install UHDAS on the academic research fleet starting in 2006. So we have a long history with the UNOLS ships. We got into an agreement with NOAA in 2015, and now we have UHDAS installed on all of their ships, which with ADCPs. I want to acknowledge the funding agencies that support our work. And I also want to say what a pleasure it is to work with the technicians on the ships, because we couldn't do this without their help. We anticipate that this collection of ships will evolve with the addition of the RCRV ships, 2 new NOAA ships. And we also have a contract with the Norwegian Institute of Marine Research to put UHDAS on 5 of their ships. And there has been interest expressed by other institutions. Next one. I thought it would be fun to come up with some statistics. Out of the 40 ships in 2021, which I said was busy, over 17,000 automated emails came through, and they were viewed by at least 2 people. Mind you, the ticketing system helps an awful lot because it gives us a digest of whether we need to pay attention or not. Only 6,300 of those were ones where we had to pay attention. Those are basically at sea cruise days where UHDAS is logging data. We generated over 1,000 tickets, sort of communication threads with things as small as, hey, we've secured the ADCP because we're going through an EEZ, or from somebody, us or them, hey, there's a problem. And the troubleshooting ones take 100 times longer than the easy ones. We've really been relying on the ability to log into the UHDAS computers on the ship. There were 160 remote logins, which required a change of configuration or an update of the code. And I'll get to that part shortly. Next slide. So just to keep it short, there were problems with the ADCPs. The weirdest one was the swapping of 2 beams in a cable termination. So we had to fix that in software, and then it got fixed. It got fixed in the cable when the ship came back from its extremely long cruise. Next slide, please. Like I said, we collect data from ancillary systems. We use 1 GPS, 1 gyro, and 1 accurate heading device for the processing, but we record all the rest of this and are improving our monitoring of it. And I will show you an example of how that evolved over this year. Next slide. So on the right, the pink with a little black tower that you see with pink and green underneath it, those are heading accuracy errors in the POS-MV, and we've been monitoring those for years. On the left, you can see gaps. These are those spikes are 12 seconds, 12 and a half second gaps in the GGA messages. We started monitoring the GPS NMEA messages, the timestamps at their arrival, finding out whether they were missing any or not. And we noticed a correlation between these heading accuracy spikes and these gaps. And so next slide. This is a little zoom in on how what that looks like. So this is a case on the Healy where there were 7 little spikes like this. Each one of these little gaps in the time also had a 5 meter offset in position and a 1/2 degree or more in heading. And so this very negatively impacts both multibeam and ADCP data. Next slide. So here's a timeline of what that looked like. In January, we started adding new plots to improve our monitoring of the GPS. And sometime in January or February, we saw the first one of these things and figured out that there was a problem. We looked back, the first one of these we found was in 2018. We had the evidence, but we didn't know that the problem was there. So in the big egg, you can see all of the ships, 23 of them, over half the ships have POS-MVs. In the orange dashed circle there, we have 16 of them that showed gaps. Not all these POS-MVs did, but the ones inside of that middle-sized circle, all of them did show these gaps. The ones in the green have now installed the beta firmware that Applanix developed over the course of like 6 or 8 months when we kept bombarding them with POSPAC data from the POS-MV. So that was a big effort on our part to track all this and write extra software to do better monitoring and better catching of the problem, and a really big effort on the part of the techs to set up this extra logging and track the data and send it off to Applanix. But so far, we have not seen the problem after the firmware was installed. So we're very happy about that. Yeah, the other ships, we're waiting for them to either come back from cruises or come back to the ship to be able to update their firmware. Next slide. I'm not going to read all of these wonderful things that happened in 2021, but we did add a best practices page to the documentation. We would like to think that the entire UHDAS system is a best practice, but it's nice to have a little page that says additional little sort of operational things. We've added a daily netCDF file in addition to the beginning of a cruise to the end of the cruise for the Oceanus cruise that's out there right now, actually, because they wanted to copy the data back to shore frequently, and they didn't want to use a lot of bandwidth. And as usual, we have the software keeps marching along, and so we have to keep up with it. I mean, the external software. Coming up in 2022, next slide. We'll just keep doing what we do. But the big thing about 2022 that I want to highlight here is that RDI has another instrument that could potentially be put on a ship, and we're sort of skeptical. But if it's wonderful, that would be great. And the Neil Armstrong is going to get one installed during their winter import, and we should be able to. We have to adapt UHDAS a little bit, but it is another RDI instrument, so we will be expecting to run that on the transit down to the Puerto Rico Trench. And Steve Daunt has said, go for it. Log the data all you want on my cruise, or whenever he needs to turn it off, that's fine. But I think we're going to get a really good test cruise for the Pinnacle 45 on the Neil Armstrong. And a much bigger deal in terms of effort is the EC150, which is a 150 kilohertz sonar, part of the EK80 suite, which is bioacoustics. This instrument is built by Kongsberg. They are in the process of refining it, and we have a loaner from Kongsberg Seattle, which Lee has gotten onto the Sally Ride, and Eric is busy with his retirement hobby right now, which is to work with Kongsberg and develop a whole new interface so that they have something we can talk to and we have a way to talk to it. And so this is a quantum leap for the acquisition part of UHDAS and may allow bioacoustic sonars, or for real, just a different 150 kilohertz sonar on ships. I guess that's the real thing. Let's see now, one more slide. So yeah, that's just a picture of a cruise I did 2 years ago when we tested the OS 150 versus the EC 150 and the testing parameters. A little bit about the testing down below. That's it. I'll take any questions or offline.
Thanks, Jules. You continue to be very busy, and we always appreciate you're always ready to answer questions at any time of day. It's amazing what kind of service you and your team provide to the fleet. It's really pretty incredible. So, any questions for Jules? I don't know, Jules. Maybe people were worried about all those big tools hanging on your back wall there. If you ask any questions, you might cut somebody's finger off.
My office looks the same as my house.
So thanks so much for presenting today. And I know you were just busy presenting extensively to RV Tech conference the other day. So thanks for all your sharing all the info with everybody.
Thanks, Jules.
Okay, Dennis, I'm going to shift it back to you.
Thank you. Great presentations, everybody. Really appreciate, like I said at the beginning, the heroes doing the work, and you're all heroes for that. So thank you, and please thank your teams on behalf of all the UNOLS community for the great work that they're doing. So let's move on to our featured speaker. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Larry Mayer to this evening where I am, at least. A lot of you probably know Larry. I haven't met Larry, but I think I've seen Larry on a few Zoom calls that Bob Carell organized some months ago. So nice to see you again, Larry. So Larry's at the University of New Hampshire, is founding director of the Center for Coastal and Ocean Mapping. He received his Ph.D. from Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Marine Physics, and then did a postdoc at School of Oceanography at the University of Rhode Island. And when I hear those two institution names, I know that we've got deep ties to UNOLS, certainly with those institutions, and I'm sure Larry does too. Just looking at Larry's record, he's a man of service. He's a member of the State Department's Extended Continental Shelf Task Force, the Navy CISEX Advisory Committee. I didn't know that was still going on. Vice chair of the Board of Ocean Exploration Trust. In 2016, Larry was appointed by President Obama to the Arctic Research Commission. In 2017, he was elected to the Hydrographic Society of America Hall of Fame. 2018, elected to the National Academy of Engineering. 2019, elected as a foreign member of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Amazing accolades across the board. First recipient of the Walter Munk Medal. That's quite an honor, with that name on it. And then I see his current research, amongst other things, advanced applications of 3D visualization to ocean mapping and applications of mapping to the law of the sea, particularly in the Arctic, which must have interesting geopolitical connections, which I'd love to hear over a beer sometime. So Larry is now the chair of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences Committee for the Decade of Ocean Science, which is working in support of the UN's Ocean Decade activities. That initiative is the topic of his talk today, so we're all excited to hear about it and learn about it. I see it in the news, but I don't really know much beyond that. So thanks for joining us today, Larry, and we'll hold our questions until the end of your presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Dennis. And before I start, I want to actually just say how much I really appreciated hearing these earlier talks. I've been around a long time, and it's just so wonderful to see the evolution that's taken place, and mostly supported by NSF, that basically is assuring that we're collecting really good data and it's being cared for, and it just really is a wonderful thing to see. And so keep it up, please. Thank you. To be honest, I'd much rather be talking about ocean mapping or ocean exploration or the work we do in the Arctic. It's more exciting in a sense for me to talk about that than to give what's going to inevitably be a more bureaucratic type presentation about the ocean decade. But hopefully what I'm going to talk about is really important to all of us, important to our science, and maybe even important to the future of our planet. So hopefully it's worthwhile. As Dennis says, I've been asked to talk about the U.S. Committee on the Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. It's a mouthful. I'll just say Ocean Decade for the most part. And that was formed in response to the establishment of the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So let me start, because I don't know how much you all know about either of those things, but let me start by offering some background on the decade. Let me share the screen here. If I haven't done that, I don't think I've done that yet. You see that okay now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Didn't want to go too far without the slides being there. So the UN decade really started way back in 2017 when the General Assembly passed a resolution that called for a decade of ocean science in support of sustainable development. That's pretty remarkable. I mean, it means that at the highest levels of government worldwide, people recognize the importance of the oceans for the long-term health and sustainability of our planet. And they charged the IOC to prepare an implementation plan for the decade. And it was a long, drawn-out process, two and a half years or so. But the overarching vision was to transform knowledge of the ocean system, its role in the Earth and climate system, including the human component, its biodiversity in the seabed, to support sustainable development. The implementation plan, which came out about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, it was a complicated document, as everything that evolves from the UN is, but it kind of had this theme of the science we need for the ocean we want. And it offered several really overarching objectives to identify and generate required ocean data, information, and knowledge, generate comprehensive understanding of the ocean, and increase the use of ocean knowledge. Those were the overarching objectives. They presented 10 challenges. We'll look at them in more detail in a minute, and 7 decade outcomes for what the ocean we want would be. So let's take a look at these challenges. You see the 10 challenges. They're divided into knowledge solutions, essential infrastructure, and a couple of foundational challenges. And I'll just quickly touch on the key words: addressing land and sea-based pollutants and contaminants, protect, monitor, and restore ecosystems, optimize the role of ocean to sustainably feed the world's population, contribute to equitable and sustainable development, understand the ocean climate nexus, build resilience and improve prediction and forecast. So those were the knowledge and solution challenges. The infrastructure ones were to expand multi-hazard warning systems, ensure sustainable ocean observing systems that deliver timely data across all ocean basins, and develop a comprehensive digital representation of the ocean. And finally, the 2 foundational ones, which really set this apart from kind of the everyday science that we do: ensure comprehensive capacity development and equitable access to data, information, knowledge, and technology, and identify and overcome barriers to the behavior change that's required for a step change in humanity's relation with the ocean. So from those challenges, they also outlined 7 goals or outcomes that really focus on societal outcomes, and they're tied into the Sustainable Development Goals, mostly Sustainable Development Goal 14, but they're tied into many of them: a clean ocean, a healthy and resilient ocean, a productive ocean, a predicted ocean, a safe ocean, an accessible ocean, and then finally an inspiring and engaging ocean. So with that, we can sum this all up really as this call for transformative ocean science solutions for sustainable development, connecting people in our ocean. So that's the framework of the UN decade. And if we look at their vision, the UN Decade's vision for how this would be organized, they have a classic UN complex organizational chart, but feeding into that were national decade committees. And the single most important reason for that is this wonderful establishment of the UN decade comes, of course, with no funding, as in most things for the UN. And so how do you fund these initiatives, these wonderful, wonderful initiatives? And I think this is where they lean towards the national programs to somehow either individually or collectively start supporting for it. They also go into philanthropic organizations and other groups, but for the most part, the funding will have to come from the individual nations. The UN is not a particular funder of this sort of stuff. Although there is some funding, I should say, minimal funding for an administrative structure. So they called upon these national decade committees, and I want to take a look at what they envision these national committees to be. I should say that, Rick Spinrad was the vice chair of the U.S. National Committee before he got this other job. I'm not sure what he's doing now, but and he used to describe what we were doing as kind of building the airplane as it was flying, because nobody really knew. This was just all happening in real time. And the same is true on the UN side. They were just kind of creating a structure as they were going along. Everything is dynamic. I think in our case, in terms of a U.S. National Committee, we were building it as we're going along. We're also reading the manual as we're going along. So there was a lot of trying to figure out what to do. This was the UN's thought about what a national committee should be. It should engage national stakeholders, enhance their access to decade benefits such as data forecast, science-based decision support tools, or capacity development opportunities. And ideally, these national decade committees should be multi-agency and multi-stakeholder platforms involving the political and scientific institutions and actors concerned by the ocean and its management. The mandate and role of the national committees will be tailored to the local context. And that was what was particularly interesting in the part of the US. Because this started a couple of 3 years ago. It was in a different administration. It was, and I'll be very frank here, is this being recorded? I don't know, it doesn't matter. It was in an administration that would not be very receptive to real interactions with these UN efforts, particularly tied into major problems of climate change. And yet we are fortunate to have a series of senior civil servants at the agencies who truly, truly cared about global science and US science and said the US has to be a participant in this. And so they searched for a mechanism that could keep the US involved with this evolving decade, but yet not fly in the face of the administration. And that's why they came to the national academies. The academies is at arm's length from the government, and asked the academies to set up a national committee. It basically just usurped the Ocean Studies Board at the time, which I chaired at that time. So that's why I evolved to become the chair of the national, the committee for the decade. But in doing that, unlike most every other nation, which there are now probably 20 or 30 nations that have set up national committees, almost every one of those nations has representatives of their federal funders on the national committee. In the US case, because we were explicitly set up to be separate from the government, there is no direct representation of the funding agencies on the committee. And that makes it a little more difficult, because at the end of the day, funding is going to be the key to this. But I think we've managed, and I'll describe what's gone on now. So we have a committee. The National Academy of Sciences was approached to establish a U.S. National Committee for the decade. That was done. It had a charter and a mandate, but like many National Academy committees, it was quite constrained in terms of what it could and couldn't do. And so this was not what the Academy calls a consensus committee. It was not a consensus study report. It was basically just a committee, an advice committee that could not make recommendations. And so the roles we were asked to play were those of communication and information distribution to make the community aware of it, to be a nexus for information between the UN decade, the US community, industry, the federal agencies, academia, and NGOs, but also to inspire the US community to start thinking broadly about what could be done. And I'll come to that in a minute. And so what the committee did, the US committee did, is set up a website, clearly the focal point for communications. It set up a series of US Nexus organizations to share information through the website and other mechanisms. There are about 80 of them now. The website has all kinds of resources on it, announcements. We also were very, very active in bringing in early career liaisons. We put out a call for early career participants. We had something like 82 applicants, I think, for that. I think we'll see that in a minute. And we're able to select 4 to be representatives on the committee. But let me just show you some of the sites. So you have the website address in terms of where you need to go there, and of course all the social media components. The goal to engage early career scientists. And so again, we've a formal process. So I said we're 82 applicants, and now 4 have been selected. Agnelli Boyd from Duke, Angie Dorr, who's a assistant professor at University of Florida College of Law, Annie Brett, Michigan State, and Grace Young, who's at Alphabet's Moonshot. So they brought a great dynamic. We also have gotten involved with an amazing group called the Youth Advisory Council. This is a group of 15 to 25-year-olds who will embarrass all of you in their energy and their focus and their organization and their technical skills. And they take part in our meetings and in our webinars and offer a very, very exciting and very hopeful perspective when we hear them present. I mentioned the Nexus organizations. I said there, well, at this point, the slide was made 60, there are now over 80 of these that again, facilitate communication across the organizations and enhance public engagement. But the big thing, this idea of engaging the US community and trying to really push the community, was our call for ocean shots. And this was a call for ambitious transformational research concepts that drew inspiration and expertise from multiple disciplines. And we really wanted them to be multidisciplinary and fundamentally advance ocean science for sustainable development. And this is what the funding agencies really wanted us to push. We put out a call for this originally last December. The response was amazing. We had a series of criteria for submission. We wanted them to be relevant to those decade challenges that I showed you. We hope that they be visionary and inspirational, really disruptive if they could be. They still had to be realizable. We didn't want things that were so pie in the sky that are just not feasible. Trans, inter, and multidisciplinary. We really wanted to engage sectors outside the traditional ocean science, both from a technological perspective, but from a social science perspective and a community perspective. If you could leverage international partnerships and collaboration, that would be great. We wanted, again, looking at those UN development goals, wanted to build capacity, strengthen the next generation, and ensure that our activities were just, diverse, equitable, and inclusive. So those are our criteria. And it was, again, remarkable, the response. We got 102 submissions. A few of them, in a generic sense, were highlighted at the kickoff meeting of the National Committee, which was last February, and that was very, very well attended. There were posters created for all of the ocean shots that wanted to, and exhibit halls, and those posters are all still on the website. And now there's all a wonderful searchable index, so you can look up by topic, speaker, author, whatever, and search all the ocean shots that have been submitted. And that's where you can find all that and see what the directory looks like. We also published a special issue of Marine Technology Journal, which had these wonderful 2-page spreads on a number of the ocean shots. So those, we weren't exclusive, they were selective. There was those people who wanted to do that, and I think there were 70 or 80 of those. And then where do we go from there? This is where the committee was somewhat stymied, given the constraints of what the committee can do. The committee cannot make recommendations because of the constraints of the academy and the constraints of the mandate of the committee. We hope to have webinars that could pursue these subjects further, but we had 102 or so ocean shots floating around. How can we organize them and so on? What we could do, of course, is expand our Nexus organizations. We've been developing relationships with national committees. We've been engaging the young ocean scientists, and the directory is available. All that stuff we're doing, but we couldn't make recommendations. All we could do is promote, foster, communicate, nurture, but not select or recommend. And here was the constraint. And fortunately, the federal agencies stepped up again. And just literally last month in October, mandated the academies to form a new consensus committee. And a consensus committee can make recommendations and can provide deliverables. So that was done last month with a very, very short time fuse. I'll show you the statement of task in entirety. It's a very short statement of task, but I'll parse it now so you don't have to sit there and read that. The essence of this statement of task is that based on the body of the submissions that we had, the ocean shot submissions. So we want to start with that framework, incorporate promising and innovative research concepts that emerge from the ocean shots, but with the constraint that they have to align with the overall goals of the UN decade. They have to connect with the themes of US decadal priorities. There's been a US decadal report and those priorities are listed there. And we have to make sure that connection is there. And I'll show you that in a minute. And finally, address compelling areas for public and private sector investment and provide opportunities for inter and multidisciplinary activities in support of ocean science. Again, this idea of really expanding to interdisciplinary and bringing in new sectors. And so that was just formed in October. We're running full speed, this new consensus committee. We are starting with our directory where we can see quickly all of the ocean shots that have been submitted and parse them in many different ways. We have the constraints of the UN decade goals, the outcomes presented, the 7 outcomes. And if we look at the US decadal priorities, we see that they're quite complementary. And so we don't have to go far astray to match the UN decade goals and the US decadal priorities. And if we look at the timeline of this committee, you'll see it's very, very short. We started in October. We are going to post the 4 draft, what we call, well, I won't call them anything right now. I'll let you see how we've divided them up. Some themes, cross-cutting themes that we were asked to do. They're going to be posted tomorrow. They're going to be open for public comment for the next couple of weeks. And they were presented this morning to SAS, to the Subcommittee on Ocean Science and Technology, representing the leadership of NOAA, the co-chairs, NOAA, ONR, OSTP, and NSF. We hope to have the revisions done by December, turning it back to SAS by January. So if we look at what we have come up with going through that process, again, a very quick process. So these are drafts. We have come up with 2 foundational themes, and these are themes that really cover the underlying infrastructure about how we go about doing the science, ensuring that the information resources are accessible or applicable and meet the needs of diverse communities. One on inclusion and equitable activities, one on data activities, an ocean of data, and we'll look more closely at each one of these in a minute. But these are ones that are going to inform every one of what we call the topical themes. And again, I'll go through the topical themes in a little more detail, not much detail, but these offer the framework under which exciting new research programs can be further refined and developed within the context of the decade and the US decadal priorities. And they're not meant to encompass every important ocean topic. They can't. But instead, they represent a subset of the promising areas selected to inspire additional investment during the ocean decade. And for the funding agencies, I hope they represent a framework that they can carry as a theme and yet still have bits and pieces that they can explore. And let's look a little more closely at the foundational themes. And when you see these titles here, these are all titles of ocean shots that have been submitted. So again, we're not basing this on nothing. This is based on a nice framework of already submitted ocean shots. We had wonderful, wonderful ideas that were submitted. And so again, the inclusive and equitable ocean theme will further the development of approaches that span the scientific, technical, policy, management, and stakeholder communities, and designed to ensure that there's the involvement of a diverse, for example, in terms of gender, sexuality, culture, ethnicity, and age, group of people, in ocean knowledge generation, and in the challenges of achieving sustainable ocean development. So this, again, is something that's designed to come up with protocols and best practices that will inform each of the topical themes. The same for the data theme. Again, an overarching framework that will improve data availability and access to the development of a framework for implementing fair and care data principles, and the creation of a path towards a digital ecosystem that delivers ubiquitous compute-intensive data services. Again, this is best practices, approaches, cloud-based approaches, database approaches that will inform each and every one of the topical themes. If we look at the first topical theme, this really evolved from the fact that probably the largest number of ocean shots focused on remarkable technologies, observational capabilities, but many of them just stovepipe. People wanted to build their sensor, their particular data collection system, their platform. And so the concept here is to have a coordinated development. And as we look through them, there was an interesting infrastructure that appeared to be able to aid all of them. And that was this idea of using ongoing cable structure to overcome some of the biggest constraints we have in ocean observation, that of power, of communication, of positioning, and of a focus on really enhancing our acoustic knowledge of the ocean, understanding that it's sound that's our eyes in the sea. And by further evolving our understanding of the acoustic environment, we can make so much more of global and basin-wide observations. And so the idea is to develop the framework, the full suite of sensors for many, many different ocean variables within the context of a potential infrastructure, and also to focus on those places that are least observed and hardest to get to that really depend on these new technologies, the Arctic, the deep sea, and the mesopelagic. So the Transparent Ocean Themes calls for a coordinated development and deployment of new technologies to measure a range of ocean variables, biological variables, chemical, physical, focus on understudied ocean regions to provide critical understanding of ocean processes needable for sustainable development. We can never forget the sustainable development criteria. It builds upon the potential of existing cable infrastructure and enhanced understanding of the ocean's acoustic environment for power, for communications, for positioning, and for the coordinated development and deployment of new technologies in that context. Processes that can be studied with these new technologies include bathymetry, heat and mass transport, circulation and mixing, ecosystem health, and marine organism biodiversity and behavior. And again, each of these relevant for environmental priorities such as climate change, ecosystem-based management, commercial and recreational, nature-based solutions. So it really, really touches on the full gamut. Our second topical theme was restored and healthy ocean, and this also had a number of candidates. And again, the idea is that we don't take one ecosystem or another. We try to look at it in a whole ocean approach, look at the connectivity among research initiatives that are now focused on restoration and sustainability. And particularly ecosystems like coral reef, coastal habitats, and again, the deep sea and the mesopelagic. Particular attention will be on research that incorporates human ecosystems into new strategies and approaches for ocean resources, health, marine transportation, renewable energy, and resilience. So again, the idea is to take a lot of individual projects, but try to tie them together into a bigger picture. At the same time, giving the funding agencies at the end of the day an overarching theme, but yet the ability which they'll inevitably have to do to pick and choose amongst them. We couldn't leave out climate resiliency and ocean solutions to climate resiliency. And this theme, again, cannot encompass everything. Climate change affects every one of our topical themes, impacts them, but this is focusing on two components of the intersection between the ocean and climate: the urgent need to anticipate and plan for coastal change in response to sea level rise and stronger coastal storms. And secondly, climate mitigation strategies that include the expansion of renewable energy generation and the development of carbon dioxide reduction and sequestration approaches. To achieve ocean resilience, climate adaptation and mitigation efforts will need to consider the potential environmental impacts and develop sustainable practices for implementation. So again, this is something that spreads throughout all of the topics. And finally, we picked a theme that is a little different, and one for which there were much fewer submitted ocean shots, but one that we just felt really resonated with the overarching goals of the decade. And that's a focus on healthy and resilient urban seas, recognizing that the urban seas are a constrained system which tremendously exaggerated problems and so closely ties into the social and human aspect. So this theme will focus on the intensity of activity and change in these kind of constrained and highly populated regions, again, all magnified by climate change. It will involve a careful design of experiments to capture and understand the impact of human activities that will yield information on mechanisms that can be employed for increasing the health and resilience of urban seas. But again, tied into the decade objectives, the large population centers also offer an opportunity for community engagement in problems that are directly relevant to their well-being and sustainability. And ocean-related issues can more easily be brought into school curricular and public events in this context, and involve diverse communities and brought to the attention of policymakers because of the proximity to the ocean. And so again, this is one where we'll try to grab in even more people and hope to build this up even further. And so those were the two foundational themes, the four topical themes. They're obviously not separate, and I can't resist. And if we had time, I'd fly you through the 3D environment created here, showing all the interconnections between the topical themes. But the idea is to give the funding agencies a framework, again, that they can build upon, that ties them into the decade, ties them into the US decadal needs. And this has to be done quickly. The timescale of having a report done by January is tied into the funding cycles of the agencies. As we said, starting tomorrow, I think morning, if you go to the National Academy Decade website, you'll see these all posted. There's much, much more information than I just presented. Already the document is on the order of 30, 40 pages. And this is just little pieces of the beginnings. There's a description of the theme. There's the tie into the decade outcomes, how they're tied into the decade outcomes. There's a connection to the ocean shots. And again, this is just an example of two, but there's a long list of decade ocean shots that are tied into each theme. And also, and here's where we're really looking for public input, potential research elements. And these are really what you can think of things that could be the components that are funded to build this bigger picture. And so please do come in, comment on that, offer new ideas, say things that you think are crazy, and particularly gaps that might be in the building of this. This was presented, as I said this morning, to SOS, to Craig McLean at NOAA, to Alex Isern and Terry Quinn from NSF, to Tom Drake at ONR, and to Amanda Netburn at OSTP. And I have their permission to tell you that it was enthusiastically received. As I point to them, I said that the ball is now in their court. If they support these themes, we'll provide the report. We'll organize future workshops to try to really put meat on some of this stuff and really design programs. But the bottom line is that we have a engaged community that has come up with a number of great ideas, but nothing's going to happen without the support of the funding agencies. And again, the response I got this morning was enthusiastic support. They're going to figure out how to do it, I hope. And let me end there. I hope that's a positive note. The website again, questions to this email address. And I suspect you may have many questions, and I'm happy to try to answer. But again, we're building this as we go along. So who knows where it'll go. But if we don't try, we'll get nowhere.
Thank you, Larry. That was really nice. I see some questions coming up on the chat. So to keep this a little organized, we'll start with Jules in a minute, and then Dan, they've got questions. And why don't you, if you have a question, just in the chat say, I have a question, and then we'll go to you next, right? We'll do it that way because it's going to be hard to see hands lifted up. And let me just start with two comments. One, you were worried about presenting a bureaucratic kind of presentation, and you did really well. I've tried to do that myself in the past, and I bore myself giving those talks, but you did really well.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. It's, to be honest, it's really not easy for me.
Number two, you talked about, when you first started, you said, wow, look at all this great stuff that is going on, with data and all that sort of thing since you've looked at, what's happening with UNOLS. And, the agencies have been stepping up and stepping up and stepping up. And it was so nice to see in your story, that you were handed lemons from the international side, and the agency stepped up with some sugar to help you make some lemonade. Because I really see something good coming out of this. And again, the agencies have stepped up. So thank everyone for that. Okay, so Jules, you want to start with your question?
Sure. I love the idea of collecting data all over the ocean. How do we deal with EEZs?
Yeah, so again, the U.S. National Committee is focusing on U.S. objectives, although they don't need to be restricted to the U.S. EEZ. And we encourage global programs and global projects. So the only way to handle other EEZs would be through international collaboration. Hopefully that makes it easier, although we have a very formal process through the State Department of requesting permission to collect data, MSR, in other people's EEZs. But if a project is part of an international collaboration, I think those challenges are much, much easier. And I think the greatest example of that is the Argo Float program, which really managed to address this question of allowing sensors to drift into EEZs in a relatively straightforward way. And so that was, again, multiple nations stepping up and saying that for the greater good, we can try to overcome some of the constraints that permitting puts upon us.
Dan?
Yes, thanks very much, Doug and Dennis. Larry, terrific presentation, and thank you so much for your excellent efforts and decades-long commitment to this. So just following on Jules's comment, one question is, are there similar efforts in terms of how you've tried to lead and sort of codify, if you will, this quite comprehensive approach to our particular U.S. national effort in this regard? And how does this relate to actually being able to routinely access and have the international partners contributing to this? Because, you know, the US for decades has made their data available within certain guidelines from funding agencies. And we've seen a relatively poor response to that in terms of international partners. It's unfortunate, but there's lots of reasons for that, which we don't need to go into. But I'm just wondering how, you know, I guess what your view is on that. And then the second part of, or maybe the third part of the third question is, in general, various ship operators deal with requesting access to international waters and EEZs that they're going to go, that they know they're going to go through for transits in different ways. Some of them, if the science party doesn't need it, they don't ask for it. In other cases, even if the science party doesn't want it, they request it on their behalf because they're collecting that data. Scripps, for example, has done this routinely over the years, and it's been great because they've collected a lot of data. So I'm just wondering whether there's an opportunity here to try to perhaps standardize this across the fleet that would help collect data which otherwise would not be collected.
Yeah, I think these are great questions and stuff I think a lot about out of the context of the U.S. National Committee, or even, but not out of the context of the decade. So let me, there's several levels of answers to your questions, and many which have no answers. I encourage you all to go to you can start with the US Decade website, because it'll have a link to the UN Decade site. What the UN Decade has done, and I've left this up so I can actually throw up this slide, because I suspected questions about this were going to come up. What the decade has gone through now is one formal call, just like we had a formal call. And I should say these ocean shot calls are a rolling call from the US perspective. We had our first call due in December. There was another one in July, and you'll see come January. So you can always add more to this. It's not a frozen process. So please, if you think of great ideas, continue to add them. The UN had its first call for what they call activities, the broadest sense are activities that are categorized as programs or projects. And a program are really global, regional scale projects. And these are the things, to be honest, most of them, there were a number of US programs that were endorsed by the UN, but these are things that are ongoing for the most part, that are involved in some international collaboration. But in part, those collaborations have had to deal with the data sharing issue all along. So I would advise you to take a look at that, see what has been endorsed by the UN so far as a program. Projects are more kind of regional in nature. They've just a week or two ago endorsed their first set of projects. You can see what they are, but those are already within the UN system. And and this is the potential, I hope, game changer that the decade could provide, is that from the pressure of the decade, this concept of international data sharing will be greatly accelerated. And I'm sure that none of these programs are going to be endorsed if they don't guarantee that data will be fully shared. Now, what's the punishment if you don't? Who knows? None of these things. But with that said, let me come to something more personal. And I'll send you, Dan, or I can send it to the. I recently wrote a paper all about this from a seafloor mapping perspective, and it was a paper aimed at the UN audience, citing their own call for this global sharing of data, and the fact that they contradict themselves when we have to go through these requests for permission to collect MSR data, and often are either given a negative response or no response, which according to the law of the sea, you can take as deemed acquiescence, but no ship's captain is going to start turning on systems and you tell them, oh, don't worry, we're protected by the law of the sea. I've had lawyers tell me I should do that in the Russian EEZ if they haven't responded. Don't worry. I said, well, you come with me on the ship. You waive the law of the sea treaty as the gunboat comes, as we're collecting data. But I'm hoping that this will lead to a discussion. We're hoping that in a year or two at the annual ocean conference at the UN, this will actually come up. And we're structuring a proposal with the World Maritime University to try to really address this issue. And part of it might be tied to the fact that nowhere in the Law of the Sea Treaty is marine scientific research defined. That was intentional. This is the creative ambiguity of negotiators. Don't define it and everybody will decide what it is on their own. But if we can come forward with a number of these underway data sets that we want to be shared, that are beneficial to the world, and have them explicitly excluded from the MSR regime, the Marine Scientific Research regime, then it is possible that we can go ahead and collect all these data sets without having the permission. It's two different sides of the story here. It's not the sharing side. This is just the collection without an issue. Let me stop sharing the screen so I can actually see who's talking. Did that at all answer your question, Dan? I don't know.
Okay, good. Carrie, did you have a comment? You still there, Carrie? Okay, is anyone else got a question? I'm not seeing anything else in the chat.
Liz Sykes has a question.
Liz, go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that overview and like putting it in the context, putting this U.S. framework in the context of the UN framework. The bit and it's just really exciting to hear that you've already got a really enthusiastic report, because from what I know about the UN decade, the thing that was most as always, is there's no funding, and so the funding has to come from different places. And so in that context, the U.S. really has a global footprint. Not telling this audience anything different, a global footprint of research. And so my question is, I believe there are also individual ocean mandates, and is that U.S. decade that with these big ocean ideas, does it address these individual ocean sort of frameworks?
Yeah, so as far as I understand, in the latest call for activities, there were, I said the first one was for programs, the second one was for projects, but they also came out, if you go to the UN Decade site, they came back with gaps where they would like to see further submissions. And one of the things they called for was a more regional approach. And I know of two that are underway, and I don't know if they've been endorsed or accepted yet, but I think there's an Arctic group that is working on one, and maybe a North Atlantic group, but I'm not sure of that. Mm-hmm. There is a call, I think, right now for this concept of regional projects of some sort. Okay.
And is that within the U.S.?
No, that's the UN. That's the UN decade. But okay. I'll tell you, in our exercise, the region that we called out was the Arctic, and that was explicitly in response to the US decadal goals, which explicitly called out the Arctic as an area of critical importance. So that was the only regional area we carved out. If you can call urban seas regional, that's a mini region.
Yeah, I give it. That's a mini regional. Yeah,
and then we also highlighted the most remote areas, the deep sea, the least studied, the understudied areas, the deep sea, the mesopelagic.
Okay. And was the calling out of the Arctic because of the climate change aspect, or just because it's one of, if I may, one of our oceans? It's sort of adjacent.
Well, I think it's all of the above. And, and again, we had a mandate to tie our themes into both the UN decade goals with their climate relevance and the US decadal goals, which of course has climate and resilience in there, but also has the Arctic explicitly called out. And we had a number of good ocean shots too. So it met all the criteria as we were doing this mixing and matching.
Right. Yeah, it's a really complicated web. This is just really exciting to see how on it, if I may, how on it you guys are. That's really wonderful.
Don't believe that. It's really tough.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Hey, so Larry, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to have you visit us, and it was a joy to, just meet you this way, and to the extent that we can meet you this way. And you're doing great work. Thank your group for all that they're doing, and good luck. Good luck carrying it forward.
Thank you. And I really encourage everybody to go. Again, I think tomorrow they should be on the website and take a look, and please offer us comments, criticism. I think it'll be an interesting couple of months to see how people react to it. So
okay, great.
Please do.
So Dan has asked if he could ask a question back to Kevin about multi-beam. So we're going to switch back there real quick. Go ahead, Dan.
Yes, thanks. I was driving in the car while Kevin was giving his presentation, and I just had one quick question and suggestion. So thanks very much, Kevin, and the work that the MAC is doing and the support that's been provided for that group has been really important for the scientific community, especially the MG&G folks, but in general, and also to the ship operators. So thanks again for that. I had actually two questions. One is, one of the things that I think would be important, and I know that the MAC page is available and folks, I think, do use it. I don't know how well versed the community is in going to the MAC page and how they realize that they have this incredible resource to call upon to help them with planning their work and having and understanding the characteristics of the systems on the various ships. So I would encourage the MAC perhaps to either through UNOLS send out sort of a blast or an update that lets the community or reminds the community about that capability. That's one thing. The sort of related to that is I think that it would be really useful for each of the operators that have the multi-beam systems on their ships of various types to try to either through UNOLS or somehow broadcast the sort of status of their systems. I mean, for instance, the Atlantis recently last summer came out of the midlife and got the new 124 system. And I know the MAC was involved in some of the tests that were done as the ship was coming back to Woods Hole. Having some ability to have some examples of the data that were collected and issues that were sort of encountered, I think would be really useful for the community in general to help them to gauge, what's available, how well it's doing, what the status is. I know from experience that when the Scripps system came to life, and they were working hard to get everything ready, and I used the ship in the early part of this year, the EM, the deep water system, the EM-122 was on Ravel. Didn't seem like it was working as well as it should be, and I know that that Lee and all of the techs were working hard to try to get it to work. There were sys problems with the software, as Kevin pointed out, that there's been issues. I just think that some way trying to more proactively inform the community about the status of the systems on all the ships would be a really good idea, if that's possible. So I know it's perhaps a little bit of extra work, but it would be, I think, really useful to the scientific community, and I think would help the operators to broadcast out sort of what they're doing and what their systems are, how they're performing, and I think in general it would help.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you, Dan. I appreciate that feedback. A couple things come to mind. The support we provide right now is kind of on call from the operator. We don't have a lot of power to force our way onto a ship. That being said, we could certainly do we could have a more proactive approach in terms of reaching out to the ships where it's been a while since we've been on board. And this, in the talk today, this was the first time I think we've shown essentially a color-coded chart of how the ships are in their life cycles for their systems, and color coding based on how recently we visited. So that I can absolutely see your point here. The related point about sharing status of issues on board different ships, that's a work in progress. We have been talking about this wiki type resource for technicians, because we see between the vessels we work with, a lot of people tackling the same problems, but they have their own documentation for them. And so, you know, through CCOM and through our work with NOAA and then through work with UNOLS, we see a lot of the same issues and the different styles of documenting those. And we are talking with other folks in industry and academia and within NOAA about how to share that, or at least have a common platform to document those things. And that fits into maybe Jules shared that great example of lots of ships presenting their issue with the Applanix systems and saying, okay, we're all having this problem. And because they were able to all come together and say, this is being seen across vessels, it resolved the problem more quickly.
So Bruce has a follow-up comment, so let's go there.
Yeah, and this is, I guess, really a shout out to folks like the MAC, to UHDAS, because as ship operators, there's just so much information. Like Dan's focusing on multibeams, other scientists focus on ADCPs, but you know, how many systems are on our ships? And there's so many data streams that are so important to different constituencies. So I'll just say that the support that the MAC provides, as well as what Jules showed earlier, really gets to, I think, the answer to what Dan wants is the kind of detailed information. Our techs, they're flat out on board, keeping the green lights flashing green. And to do anything more, we're at max. So the support we get from groups like this is vital, I would say. And so thanks to MAC and thanks to the agencies for funding folks like that.
I would just like to follow Bruce's point, because I was going to actually interject that I realize that perhaps some of what I'm asking or what I'm suggesting might place an extra burden on the shipboard sort of technical groups, which, as Bruce said, I think everybody across the fleet would say they're all maxed out doing what they need to do. It's only gotten more complicated for the technical groups on board. So I'm totally appreciative of that. I do think that there's, and frankly, it is the operator's ships. It's not the MAC's ship. So there's those kinds of issues as well to sort of consider. I'm just trying to make the point that ultimately, I think in sort of the best sort of possible way, this is information which will help the user, help the operator, help the community, help larger efforts like what Larry was just talking about in terms of trying to get the best mapping that we can get done. And I know that I'm only talking about mapping right now, but it also applies to other data sets. But so I am appreciative of that, Bruce, and I do realize that. And I think the MAC is trying to do the best that they can too, with all of the various institutions and their technical groups and their systems. So I know it's a difficult problem, and I think we've made a huge step forward in getting the MAC to help everyone, operators and sort of science groups as well with this particular issue. But so anyway, thank you very much.
One related point I'll bring up, it may be related to the issue of techs being fully loaded on board, and also one of the limitations we run into with Paul, Vicky, and myself is that many of the ships are coming out of shipyard at roughly the same time. So the winter tends to be a little bit quieter, and then the spring and summer gets very busy. And so if there's a way that we can encourage ships to think about opportunistic testing spread throughout the year, especially during transits, we're always ready and eager to help work things into other opportunities that come up. And we have learned a lot about certain system performance just on those transits or running over existing reference surfaces. So there may be some opportunities there.
Okay, thank you all so much. Doug and Alice, you got something before we wrap up?
Vicky had one more comment. Vicky?
Yeah, I just wanted to add very briefly, because I know we talked for a while, but what I heard Dan saying was a request for us to connect a little bit more directly with the science community. And I think that that's a really good point, and we can repackage. So a lot of the information that we put forward is very technical and perhaps a little bit less accessible to the science community. But I think it should be a priority for us to repackage some of that information. It certainly is a priority for us to put some of our best practices in the ocean best practices space for a broader community. You know, working with R2R, GMRT, and the MAC, the different parts of the life cycle, I think gives us a really good opportunity to provide feedback to the community and help them plan a little bit better. So hopefully next year at this meeting, we'll give you a report on some progress in that space.
Great, thanks, Vicki. Very helpful and great discussion by everybody. Again, many thanks to Larry for his presentation. It helped bring all this to light, the importance of all this. So that's about a wrap for our agenda today. Next Monday, we're back at it for session 7 of the annual meeting, which we'll have committee updates from all the different committees that are really the backbone of UNOLS. So with that, thanks everybody. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and great job by all that make our community what it is. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.